This week on the BackTable podcast.
I ended up taking over this fellow's debt, the building, built it up, virtually zeroed him out from his $4 million worth of debt. A year later, I sold it to a publicly traded company for 8 figures. And I took that money and I founded ProScan. I founded the infrastructure and the people. I started building departments, which I was not great at, but it was better than the average doctor. And ProScan came to be. The office opened in Cincinnati, was hugely successful. And with that cash and my partners, one of whom is a TV broadcaster, we went and opened the second one in Cincinnati and a second one in Columbus.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BackTable Innovation Podcast. You can find all previous episodes of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and of course on backtable.com. This is our next installment in the BackTable Innovation Show, where you're going to hear stories from entrepreneurs who are helping to drive healthcare forward through health tech innovation. This is Brian Hartley, who's your host this week. I'm a radiologist living in Nashville and co-founder of an early-stage medical device company in the imaging space. I'm very excited to introduce our special guest this week, Dr. Stephen Pomerantz. Dr. Pomerantz is a renowned radiologist, author, athlete, and entrepreneur. He was one of the first MRI-trained fellows in the country and writer of the MRI Total Body Atlas. He's also the founder and CEO of ProScan Imaging and co-founder of Modality, formerly known as MRI Online. I like to call him the most interesting man in the world. With that, welcome, Dr. Pomerantz.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate you having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, let's dive right in.
Sure.
So let's start with kind of background. Tell us about yourself, where you grew up, anything to give us insight into what made you who you are today.
Sure. So I met a real mentor of mine, and it was a guy named Benjamin Felsen, who was the friend, one of the dearest friends of my wife's father. And he was, and probably still is, one of the most famous radiologists ever. He really developed an enhanced chest radiology.
This is the Felsen's book, I see.
Yeah, Felsen's book. But he was the guy for 20 years, and he trained some really influential people that had a big effect on my life. And Dr. Felsen had his own gift, which was that he had seen more X-rays and images than anybody on the planet. So he had incredible experience, and he influenced me to go into radiology. So I'd been accepted into a program, an internal medicine program, with the idea I'd go into cardiology. And the guy that sponsored me, I went in and said, hey, I think I want to go into radiology. Can I forego my year at Mount Sinai that you recommended me for? And I was going to stay there a year or 3 years. I wasn't sure. And he said, hell no. He said, if you do that, he said, you won't get a residency in this country. I'll make sure you never do. So yeah, he was pretty tough. And so I went to New York. Penny and I went there. I trained in internal medicine. We had our first child there. We lived in the Upper West Side, which was kind of a tough area. And I had an amazing experience there, wonderful experience. Worked at Elmhurst Hospital, which was a tough inner city hospital, the Bronx VA.
Did you go all the way through internal medicine?
I didn't go all the way through, but I'd taken my senior year in medical school. I pretty much did a mini fellowship in medicine. I did almost all medicine. I did a full year at Sinai, so I had 2 really intense years of medicine under my belt, which was another thing that helped me dramatically. I wouldn't call it an inflection or turning point, but I would say it helped me become a better communicator with physicians on the clinical side. Then we eventually moved back to Cincinnati. I was in residency. I was blessed with a really good memory. And so I picked it up pretty quick. And in my second year, at the end of my second year, my chairman, who was Jerome Wyatt, a pioneer in the field, but also the chairman of the American Board of Radiology, he said, listen, my friend has one of the first MRIs in the world down in Miami. And we don't know anything about MRI here in the Midwest yet. He goes, why don't you go down there, learn MRI, I'll waive your final year of residency, and bring it back and teach us. That was like in March or April. My wife was pregnant, and the idea was for me to go like 2 months later, which is crazy in medicine, in the middle of a residency. He had the power to waive a year, and indeed he did. I went down to Mount Sinai, where one of the first MRIs in the United States was, and I was a fellow. I learned MRI. Every single MRI was accompanied by mandate, either a CT or an X-ray or a myelogram And, it was like the Wild West. We were in a trailer. We were in the middle of a parking lot. We even lived in there for a few days during a hurricane. And, I met some really great, influential mentors there that also had a big impact on me. One was a guy named Jeff Tobias, who I still talk to, friends with to this day. Another one was a guy named Jerome Sheldon, who was the head of neuro, but he was a very, very kind, ebullient guy, loved what he was doing. So he was a good role model. And the chairman of the department was very kind to me, Manuel Villamonte. I believe he lived till 100, and was another luminary guy in the field of radiology for the last 50, 75 years. So I did that. I learned a ton, and I got my nuclear medicine certification. I did a fair amount of ultrasound. I came back to Cincinnati. I was an attending/fellow in CT and interventional procedures, and then I was going to stay there and teach MRI at the university. Some unnamed person came along and said, "Hey, no, you're not going to be the head of MRI, so-and-so is, but you can teach that person," and the department had to do MRI, and, that just was not my personality. I had done all this work, and I was expecting to, run the MR section, so to speak. And that got pulled out from under me, so I said, okay, I'll go into private practice. And somebody donated an MRI to a local, very esteemed hospital in Cincinnati, and I don't know that they were thrilled to see me. They really didn't think they needed a radiologist. It was just 4 radiologists or 5 at the time, all conservative, all been there a long time. They'd done only hospital radiology, and I started there and built the MR program, first with 1 MR, then with 2 MRs, built a fellowship there where I had anywhere from 2 to 6 fellows a year. My group never had to take night call. The fellows took night call, which at that time there were no night shift people. So if you were a radiologist, you woke up at night every 3rd, 4th, 5th night, whatever. So they didn't have to take night call. Started a residency program in nuclear medicine, and I started teaching. I had a course. It was a course about MRI. Nobody knew anything about MRI. And 10 people came. My wife baked a cake, and all they talked about was the cake. So then, I decided to open the course up in a large auditorium. About 400 people came. And that was in 1985. And then I continued on after that, having these smaller courses. But, they went from 10 to 20 to 40 to 50. And eventually, over 200 people would come to virtually every course. So I built up a very large Rolodex. I had a clientele that eventually bloomed into almost 14,000. That took years, but, these were radiologists all over the world. So it really gave me an insight not only into the field, but if somebody asked me, my relative is sick in Melbourne, Australia, I could actually find them, the right physician in Melbourne, Australia, because I'd had people that come to visit and train with me from Melbourne, Australia. So, it gave me a great deal of satisfaction to have this international network of great, great physicians that could direct me to the great clinical physicians should I need them. So I sort of became a conductor. And at the same time, I was reading a ton of MRIs from my group after hours. So I would, because I'd get these cases now sent to me from all over the world that were not done in Cincinnati. They weren't done at the hospital. Started out like 10, then 50, then 100. I was reading 100 MRs a day on view boxes. And I was putting all the money into the group, so it was very lucrative. And when I'd go on vacation, I'd take the view boxes with me. My wife and I would have a dictaphone, and we'd send the dictaphone back to Cincinnati. The cases would get transcribed, and everything was totally sneaker net. And, hauling 6 children with us. So it was a major undertaking.
Well, how did ProScan figure into this?
So, eventually I'm reading 150 MRs a day, and the chairman of the department, who was a really dear friend of mine, we shared an office together, said, "This is ridiculous. You're doing all this work after hours. You're putting all the money in the group." He said, "I'll give you permission. Just take it home and do it at home. And, you should keep the revenue, and just let's keep the fellowship running." So he was a really stand-up guy, and, so he let everybody know we were doing that, and that was fine. They begrudgingly said fine, and it was more than fair. But I went up to see the CEO of the hospital. I said, hey, we are busy as heck. We're doing 50 MRs a day on these two old scanners now. We need new equipment. And he looked at me and he said, Steve, he said, I would do it. He said, but the hospital had a down year last year. The hospital lost money. And he said the gift shop lost $3 million. And given that situation, we can't get you new MRIs, even though the MRI section was one of the most lucrative after cardiology in the entire hospital. I mean, it was, at that time you were getting $1,000, $2,000 dollars for an MRI. I walked out and I said, I don't think I can do this for another 20, 30 years. This is crazy. The most important department, the most cutting edge department, the most lucrative department you're not going to support because you've got a bunch of losers. So I'm driving home, and I don't remember how Penny and I communicated. I don't remember if there were cell phones then or not. It was in the 90s. And I don't think so. But at any rate, I was talking to her, and I said, I think I need to do something different. Even though I was, making a 7-figure salary, I said, Penny was pregnant with our sixth child. I said, I think I want to raise the bar of care. I want to do something where service is like the Four Seasons. The quality is extremely high. At the time when I trained a fellow, they didn't know anything about MRI, even though they'd done a residency. Their miss rate was over 50%. So I wanted to nationally and internationally really raise the bar of care in this advanced imaging modality, which I knew was cutting edge. And so I said, I think I'm going to open my own office. And my wife, who is very brave and very supportive, said, you know what? Do it. I'm behind you 100%. I know you'll be successful. At that time, I was already reading for another office up in Columbus, Ohio. And that office was owned and run by an internist who was not skilled at all in business or understanding MR. And he asked me if I would take over his debt, which was $4 million. He owned the building, the equipment, all that stuff, and he was going into bankruptcy. So I said, I'll tell you what, I will take over your debt. I'll take over the building. I will zero you out. I'll attempt to zero you out by giving you 1% of all the revenue that comes in, and I will read. And I read from Cincinnati for Columbus. I'd go up there quite a bit while I was opening my office in Cincinnati. So I did have that, and I had my reading business, which I had already taken out, and that sustained me. It wasn't like I was completely naked financially. So, but I took an educated risk, walking away from what was a very solid job. And they wanted me to stay. I was the chairman of the department at the time, but they didn't want me doing anything on the outside that wasn't hospital related, which is not the case today, of course. I ended up taking over this fellow's debt, the building, built it up, virtually zeroed him out from his $4 million worth of debt. A year later, I sold it to a publicly traded company for 8 figures. And I took that money and I founded ProScan. I founded the infrastructure and the people. I started building departments, which I was not great at, but I was better than the average doctor. And ProScan came to be. The office opened in Cincinnati. It was hugely successful. And with that cash and my partners, one of whom is a TV broadcaster, we went and opened the second one in Cincinnati and a second one in Columbus.
Who is the broadcaster?
His name's Chris Collinsworth. He's an NBC broadcaster, yeah. So we had met when he was a player. He had a very low-grade but annoying injury. He was a sprinter, a runner, a very gifted athlete. And when he ran at 100% speed, he had discomfort. 80% speed, he didn't. So the team didn't really understand how that could happen, and questioned his commitment. But it was truly an injury, and you could only see it on MRI. It looked like it might be abnormal on bone scan, but when I saw it on MRI, I knew exactly what it was, and it was a very low-grade stress injury that very hard to see with anything else. So you could see some swelling in the bone, and when he exerted a certain amount of pounds per square inch of force on it, it hurt, and that is when your running at your hardest or jumping your highest. And so we became friends, and for 2 years, we'd grab a dinner, we'd grab a lunch, our wives got to know each other, just a pure friendship thing. And but both of us are very similar. We're both very entrepreneurial and oriented. We've had, in some ways, a lot of similar life experiences. He was great help to me in the beginning. That being said, I gradually increased the number of centers that I had like a spiral. Once I had a success in a city, I leveraged that to kind of cover the full geography of that city. And I got to a certain point where now the number of MRIs that I was reading a day with colleagues now that I had recruited, some of my fellows came with me, and it was up to like 500 a day. At that time, maybe I had 15, 17 offices, and I realized I either have to become a full-time businessman or woman, a business person, or go full-blown into medicine, stay full-blown into medicine, which was really my passion, being able to solve people's problems that other people can't solve. And I got a lot of pleasure from that. So I said, I got to find somebody that's really special.
Somebody to run the business.
Yes, and I looked very hard for almost 2 years. Eventually, I stumbled, and stumbled is the right word. I asked our director of marketing, who is an independent guy downtown, a very successful, started his own business, and asked him for some references. He gave me one. I vetted this person very carefully. He'd been in the telecom space. He'd run a multi-billion-dollar company. He could scale. He had enormous innate math skills. He could CFO, he could COO. So he was just a really unique person. And this is the kind of person you need for a real business. This is a problem in medicine. We teach people how to administrate. We don't teach them how to truly run an enterprise in a lean, efficient, high-quality fashion, and then scaling. Physicians aren't familiar with scaling. Neither are administrators. So I called one of his references, who is a 40-year veteran of P&G, a guy from, I think, the Netherlands. And I said, I'm thinking about hiring so-and-so, and his name's Michael O'Brien. And there's silence on the other end of the phone. I said, uh-oh, here it comes. And he had a heavy Dutch accent. He says, Dr. Pomerantz. He said, I've worked at P&G for 40 years. He said, this is the best person that I ever worked with in my entire career.
Oh, wow.
He said, if you don't hire him, you are an idiot. Those exact words.
What are you going to do?
I hung up the phone and I hired him.
Yeah.
And from there, ProScan really took off. It became a concern that now serves about 500 physicians' offices a day. So we have about 500 clients. And then we have about 40 of our own offices, mostly concentrated in the Midwest and Florida. And we're about 85 radiologists. And that's pretty much how it came to pass.
That was incredible. So in the last 10 minutes or so, I would love to hear your thoughts on the future of radiology. I know I've heard you mention, non-physician readers and, mid-level provider readers. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on that, where it's going, how it's going to be implemented.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of young physicians. I think physicians really are part of one of the most elite, if not the most elite club in the world. And when my professional athlete friends brag about their athletics, I say, hey, can you memorize a 500-page textbook in a month, or 5 of them or 6 of them? Could you open somebody's belly and fix an aneurysm and save their life in 90 minutes? I mean, doctors are amazing. I don't even think they realize how amazing they are. So at this point in my life, I get tremendous pleasure out of making all physicians better at what they do, out of helping people that cannot be helped, or, there's no answer. So I'm often consulting on cases, second order, third order, fourth order. And, it's very rewarding to be relevant and to give to people. So as far as the future of radiology, it's not just a young people's sport. Radiologists can perform well into their 80s and even 90s as long as their brain holds out, because it's not You're not standing over an operating table. A couple things are happening now. People are living longer. Yeah, maybe here or there the lifespan decreases for a year, but eventually people are going to live to 110 or 120. So you're going to have a very large older population, and I can see well on into the future, people living to 150, them figuring out how to elongate DNA polymerase and telomeres, yeah. So I can see, and when that happens, that's all the more reason for technology to be involved in their survival, and not just in living longer, but living longer with quality, which everybody really wants to do. It's not about living longer, it's about living longer better.
Health span versus lifespan.
Absolutely. Well said, Brian. And
I wish I came up with it. I did not, but that is the way the terms that are coming around now is health span.
Yeah. I hear you, and I have heard that moniker used before. So I think the very nature of the way the world is going means that radiology is just going to continue to explode. People want to do things non-invasively, and radiology is the non-invasive tool. Cardiology is also a non-invasive tool.
And staffing levels too. I mean, I think what you're getting to is with volume. If volume is only going up with radiology, I mean, you see it. You see folks getting burned out.
It's already happened.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of work has already outstripped the number of radiologists that are available, maybe by as much as 30% in some countries, which is really problematic and challenging. It's great for people looking for jobs, but it's not so great for people that are hiring. So, there's always a balance there. But that being said, radiology is a futuristic subspecialty. A lot of AI will integrate into it more seamlessly than in some of these other higher risk areas like robotic surgery. Of course, that'll use AI, but I think it'll integrate faster into radiology. Lower risk, and people are going to be scared to say, I've been asked 100 or more times, will AI replace me? And the answer is no way. The amount of judgment that's required is just too complex.
Comparing with prior exams, understanding the clinical history, all of it. You're looking at, you may need to compare a CT to an MRI or an ultrasound, or, it's way more complex than looking at a static image.
Yeah, and I can't see AI being able to pull a PET scan from 7 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And compare and measure a nodule or, a bone lesion.
Now, honestly, Brian, I think it will happen. I don't think it'll happen in your lifetime, but I think it will happen because of the speed of computing. But for this generation of people that are thinking about going into medicine or thinking about going into radiology, that is not going to happen. What it's going to do, it's going to make more exams, because the exams are going to be faster, they're going to be more accurate, and it's going to make radiologists
faster, more efficient.
Yep. Yes, at what they do. So I don't see it immediately in the next 70 years as a threat. But after that, I think, if you're really forward-thinking and you really think futuristically, I think potentially down road, 70, 80, 100 years from now, it is a potential threat to actually all workers, not just in medicine.
Where do mid-levels come in, do you think, or non-physician readers, maybe that's the term?
Yeah, so another way to think about mid-levels is think about AI. I mean, you're not going to stop AI from maturing and being integrated into radiology. It could knock out a few areas of radiology, but as I said, I think it'll make radiologists more efficient. But the way the world is going, there's no way that you're going to be able to stop this railroad from coming down the track, and that is PAs, NPs, being trained to do very, very specific roles, radiology assistants. They're trained to do one or two things really, really well at a high level. We have a few of them in our practice. They're supervised in every case that they ever touch. They're co-read, they're proofed, they're read again, they're proofed by a proofer. So, we go the extra mile, but they get so good. Somebody that's reading just MRs of the knees and shoulders, or just MSK, MRI, and doing absolutely nothing else, or somebody that's doing arthrograms and, injections, or somebody that's just reading spine x-ray. Of course, these are all double read and co-read by radiologists who then are the final reader, the final decider of what goes on the paper. So you have to be very diligent about that. But there are efficiencies there. Now, I know in some places, you may see, somebody read something, it gets rubber stamped. That's problematic. And I think in some, even in some residencies, people are reading less x-rays. They're going to, other providers, and those mid-level providers send them on to the attending rather than to the residents. So I'm seeing a lot of radiologists that don't know how to read x-rays. And, if this happens in other specialties, I do see it as a training problem. Now, maybe there'll come a time when there aren't any x-rays or there aren't any ultrasounds, but I don't see that in the near future, and that is where a lot of the PAs and RAs and NPs live on the professional side. Another place where you'll find a lot of mid-levels helping out is in IR.
Now, that for sure. I've seen that. They're doing cases and, ports or things, dialysis catheter placement, and then, the physician's there to supervise.
Yeah, and they do what's called light IR, which is thoracenteses, paracenteses, that are simple abscess drainages, small superficial biopsies, and they even do, a lot of the fluoro, the swallows, the barium swallows, etc. So they're incredibly productive, they're incredibly efficient, and because their area of interest is so narrow, it becomes so good at what they do.
Now, what would you call light? Let me use the same phrase in diagnostic. What would you call light diagnostic radiology? And it could probably go both ways. It's either very narrow, right? I guess if you're very narrow, that could be considered that, but what else?
So light diagnostic radiology would be, x-ray.
Which can be really hard. I mean, x-rays, like a chest x-ray, can be, as Belson, I'm sure, would say, you can get a lot out of a chest x-ray. I mean, they can be incredibly challenging.
You're so right. And incredibly dangerous to read. And that's why it's important for somebody to get really, really good at reading them. And if you train PAs to read them really well, then great. Or NPs to read them really well. If you don't, you end up with a lot of what we're seeing now, even in residents who aren't that good at reading them, not that good at looking behind the heart, behind the diaphragm, etc. But I will say that if you really train them the right way, a train-the-trainer type person, somebody who has world-class experience trains them, then you can have folks that are really, really good at it. But there are some downsides. You're taking away that experience from residents. But in private practice, it's enormously helpful. It's enormously efficient. And even in academic radiology, it is happening perhaps even faster in academic radiology. And from the training standpoint, it's problematic in academic radiology. Economically, it's here to stay. You are not going to eliminate it unless, the U.S. government mandates against it, and the U.S. government is going the other way. They're going towards nursing providers, towards NPs, towards mid-levels.
Are there training programs out there now for mid-level diagnostic radiologists, or is this kind of like an apprenticeship where you come in and you say, we'll train you to read specifically MSK or chest x-rays or whatnot?
Well, there are PA programs, for instance, PAs, where you can focus your efforts in radiology. Most of the time, though, a PA comes out of what I call a clinical practice. For instance, we have a musculoskeletal MRI radiologist, which is not light DR. It's heavy DR. Trained this woman for 2 years. She's a former military person. She's very disciplined.
She's a radiologist? You call her a radiologist and she's a PA?
We don't call her a radiologist. We call her a PA who specializes in MRI, and we read together almost every day. If not shoulder to shoulder, then we look, computer to computer. We go over the case, we go over the report, we go over the wording, sometimes go over the grammar, go over the pagination. But she's gotten so good. Her miss rate's less than 0.1%. Probably as good as any MSK radiologist that you'll find around in any general practice in the United States. And in ProScan, you have to have an incredibly low miss rate. I mean, we're expected, because of our large number of MRs that we read, 1,500, 2,000 a day, we're expected to give the answer almost 100% of the time. So she's extremely well trained, and she's in her 5th or 6th year now, maybe even 7th. So we developed her and taught her how to read MRI. But prior to that, she was an orthopedic clinical PA.
That's helpful.
She knew a lot about ortho. She'd read a lot of x-rays. So the same thing with our spine PA. He was a spine surgeon for many years. He reads spine x-rays. He's being trained to read spine MRI. Again, everything is read with the radiologist.
How long does it take to train somebody who is not a non-radiologist to read x-rays and then to read, more advanced diagnostic studies like MRI?
Yeah, Brian, that's an excellent question. It's actually easier to identify that they have arrived in MRI than an x-ray, because x-ray is more nuanced.
And subjective.
It's more subjective, but I would say to get any PA to be competent, for me to be comfortable in the readout, as opposed to uncomfortable where I'm just looking here and there and everywhere,
right.
What did he or she say exactly? It's a year.
Wow.
For them to get...
And that's MR or plain films?
Either one.
Oh my gosh.
Either one. I think for x-ray, it's a little faster if you narrow down the x-rays to, say, spines and chest x-rays. Then you're probably talking 3 to 6 months.
Wow. And are they sitting next to you almost like a fellow? I mean, I assume like a fellow. You're just reading volume all day and teaching, and they're sending you studies. Okay.
That's correct.
Now, are they being paid during this time, like a fellow would, or
they are being paid?
Okay,
they are being paid. They're being paid handsomely, and then after they've been with us for a few years, the cases may come to a second read list, just the X-rays,
and that's where one of you guys is on the list, and you have to go through and just kind of like sign off. This is right. I'd change this, something like that.
That's right, and we have an automated piece of software that sends them back exactly what they said, exactly what we said, the changes that are made, so they can see
the difference.
So it's still getting trained on the fly forever. But in MRI, we do every case shoulder to shoulder or face to face on the computer. In X-ray, sometimes after 2 or 3 years, they'll come over, secondary to the list, and then you go through the list rather than sitting shoulder to shoulder. But it's always read in the end game by a radiologist.
Wow. That is incredible. And I think I am very, very interested to see where this goes and if more training programs specifically pop up like this, because I think there is a force multiplier that can happen. If it's happening in IR, why wouldn't it happen in diagnostics? And if the economics make sense, then that's probably one of the biggest drivers, as long as patient care is not sacrificed in the process.
Well, in order for that to happen, there has to be that 1, 2, 3 year training, and then constant training thereafter. Every day for the rest of their lives, they have to see the mistake that they've made, have it corrected, and have it put in front of them. But you have to learn how to make that efficient, Brian. And but there are, by the way, other mid-levels. There's something called a DAC bar. Those are doctors of chiropractic radiology. There are DAC bar programs. In certain states, they are allowed to read certain examinations. In radiology now, of course, everybody that goes through radiology does nuclear medicine, but back in the day, nuclear medicine was broken off, so people could come into MRI through the nuclear medicine route. That's no longer the case. Now people come in through radiology because nukes has been folded into radiology, but it used to be its own specialty.
Incredible. Well, I think we're out of time, and I want to thank you, Dr. Pomerantz, for sharing your life story with us, what motivates you, and how you've basically created an incredible career. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to go through a summary of some of the ideas that I've picked up that you mentioned, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, or add anything in if you'd like.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out one other thing that I didn't mention that I should have. As a corollary of that, ProScan is a very philanthropic organization, and that came from my wife, my children, their upbringing. My wife and her partner, Holly, have raised millions and millions of dollars for women's imaging. We have a not-for-profit set of women's imaging centers in Cincinnati, Ohio. We have programs for women that provide, bags of knowledge. They can go to our women's center. They get transportation. They get consultation. And, they put everything in one spot. So, a woman wouldn't have to go from here to there to get, whatever else, she needed for her examination. And also, ProScan holds a chess tournament for inner city children. About 5,000 people come to Pomerantz Stadium every year. 700 kids play. Their parents all watch.
That's incredible.
Quite amazing.
That's huge. That's awesome.
It is huge. From 15 states or so, and we put that on with the Bengals and with my partner, Chris Collinsworth. It's part of the Chris Collinsworth ProScan Fund, or CC Pro. So there's a lot of philanthropic activity going on. We actually we cardiac screen or scan first responders gratis, firefighters, EMTs, and police in the communities that we're in. So that giving piece, while I didn't fully understand it as a young man, once my wife educated me and showed me what it was all about and how satisfying it could be as part of a life, we engaged in a very serious way.
That's awesome. Next I have, and this one is really probably center to what I hear when you speak, and that's having a growth mindset, what they would call nowadays. They didn't have a name for it probably back then, but you have a growth mindset to the nth degree. So whenever you hit a roadblock, you use that energy to level up to the next level, whatever it was. Whether you were fighting, that turned into boxing. You channeled it. Wanted to be section chief of MRI, or the first, I guess, the first chief of MRI. When they said no, you're like, fine, I'm going to go to start my own practice. And then you did the same thing, I guess, when you didn't have support for your section. You needed new equipment. I think you hit a problem, you found a solution, and it actually made you better. And I think that goes hand in hand with you trying to be the best at whatever you do, and you're not going to let anybody get in your way of that. And I think for those listening, trying to do the best at whatever you do, wherever you are in your stage of life, is going to give you the best chance of success. Nothing's guaranteed, but it'll give you the best chance of success. Would you say that's fair?
Yes. I would also say that, initially, the younger I was, the more it was about me being the best at reading MRIs. I've probably seen more MRIs than anybody on the planet at this point in my life. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that that's a little bit selfish. And but it was who I was. There's no denying it. And as I matured, and through the influence of my wife Penny, who's an extraordinary person, her parents, my family, especially my father, I realized that the true value in that, the true value in being really great at something, is being able to take that and harness it to make other people's life better. Whether you're making a doctor amazing at MRI, herself or himself, or whether you are helping a patient that nobody else can help, while there's a lot of self-satisfaction in that, it's just a wonderful thing. It's a positive
altruism.
Thing.
Yeah.
So, that skill, you turn that skill into someone else's blessing.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So thank you so much, Dr. Pomerantz. I think this was an incredible summary of your life and motivations and trials and tribulations and successes. I think our listeners are really going to enjoy hearing your story. And I want to thank you again for taking the time with us.
Brian, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, DM us at BackTable Innovation on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. BackTable Innovation is produced and hosted by Brian Hartley,
Aaron Fritz,
Diana Velasquez-Pimentel,
and Eric Gamacher.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon, with support from
Josh McWhirter,
Aaron Bowles,
Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Social media and PR by Ann Dang.
Administrative support provided by Jamila Kennebrew.
Thanks again for listening.
See you again next week.